We're on to topic number 3, which is creating slides. I think this is the most important section that we're going to cover. Although you may have heard me say that about our first topic on defining your audience. Oh yeah, that's really important. Or the second part, which is creating a great storyline and ability to be persuasive. Oh, that's really important. And the next topic, slides. Oh, that's really important. I hope you get the message. Every single topic is important because in this very brief amount of time you have to present, you want to capitalize on that time and maximize your chance of getting your point across. Slides are very important because it could make the difference between you getting the point across or not, or you convincing someone or not, or you being confusing or clear. So let's make sure the slides are as good as we can make them so the probability rises that we make our point. Topic 3 covers the general aspects and the qualitative types of slides that you're going to be encountering. So we're going to have some general comments, talk about qualitative slides in detail, then go through some do's and don'ts pertaining to slides. If you're keeping track, this is where we are. We covered the game planner. We covered the design and leading to the storyboard. Now we have that storyboard. In a sense, it's like the blueprint to build the building. Right? We have our blueprint to build our slides. Each slide is part of the story because that's what the storyboard did. So we don't have to worry about that at this point because we've already gone through that planning, and now it's time to execute on the slide and the story that is going to be covered by each slide. And of course, cover do's and don'ts. There are 10 core slides. It doesn't mean that there aren't more. These are 10 slides that you ought to build because chances are you're going to want some or all of these to make it to the final cut. So the first is executive summary. Second is significant painful problem. Third is the target market size, the growth and the customer segments. Fourth is the business model. Fifth is the product description and the status. Sixth is your unfair advantage or your competitive differentiation. Seventh is your growth and traction strategy. Eighth is a management team roles. 9 is a financial forecast, the uses, the needs, the milestones. And 10 is the ask. So again, these are by way of preparation, but chances are you're going to use, like I said, most if not all of these in your final cut of slides. Here's some basics on slide design. First, there's a reason for every slide. If you find that you've already made that point, throw it away. It's redundant. If you find that it kind of brings you off the main point and it's a tangent, get rid of it. So make sure each slide is important and it has its place in your deck. So make the point obvious to the audience and the data supports your message. This is not a mystery. You want the slide to be crystal clear so that when you make your point, the audience looks at it and says, yeah, I agree. I see the data. I could make the same conclusions as the speaker did. We don't want any confusion on the point you're trying to make or any ambiguity. The other aspect is visual placement and design matters. That's because it's a visual part that will appeal to some and maybe turn some people off. Be very careful to pick your graphics and look and feel of your slides. The essential point on the slide makes the title. The title should never, as I said, never be generic. For example, you've probably seen some slide presentations that says something like market share. Well, what does that tell you? Nothing. It means that the slide is going to talk about market share. We want the slide to be descriptive of the point you're trying to make, like, our company's market share is eroding rapidly. Oh, now I got the message of what you're trying to say. We're in trouble. Our market share is eroding. Or market share is exploding. We're on the high side of this particular concept. So this is what we want to make sure. The slide title, every slide title, should tell the story. And then the middle or the body of the slide should be some graph or chart or illustration that makes the point clear. So the audience sees and hears you say the title of the slide. Now they're ready to say, why do you say that? So let's see if I agree. So the data in the center of the slide should make your point very clear and convincing. So you're keeping the audience going along with you. Not only are they understanding the points, but they're agreeing on the basis on which you made your conclusion of that point. So title is never generic. It tells the point. The body reinforces that title. Here's some other basics on the contents. KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Right? We don't want complexity. We're not trying to show off how smart you are. You want to have slides that make sense to the right level of detail so the point is made clearly and professionally. The second point is use an active and not passive voice. Avoid be or ing. We want to be the market leader. It's not very strong, is it? You want to assert that we are the market leader. It's a very different feel when you use an active voice. Third is avoid full sentences on slides. The reason is that if you put a full sentence on a slide, guess what? Your audience will read it. So while you're speaking and you're trying to use your voice and your tone so carefully, the audience has already read it because people can read faster than you can speak. So the trick to that is don't write the entire sentence out. Put a phrase that tells them what you're going to cover, but not necessarily all the points that you're going to make. Instead of saying, our competitive differentiation is our patent in this portfolio. If you put patent, they don't know what you're going to talk about, right? So your bullet point says patent, and then what you say is our key intellectual property is the patent that we hold in this portfolio. So you can say a complete sentence, but your slide should have a phrase or a few words so the audience will follow along what you're saying, but not follow along to the point that they don't have to listen to you. The fourth point is beware of certain gotchas. There would be jargon using tech speak or business speak, or abbreviations like, oh, we have an API that works to increase the bandwidth of our workers, and therefore we'll have the best SaaS application possible. The audience may understand what you're talking about, but that's not right because you may lose some of the audience. So be very, very careful of jargon. Next is avoid, if you can, sports analogies. I love sports. I use sports analogies, so it's very hard for me to avoid sometimes. But something like, oh, this is a grand slam. What would happen if you're speaking to an international audience that doesn't know American baseball? What's a grand slam? So avoid sports analogies because you might turn people off, or worse than that, they may not understand your point. Next is watch out for idioms like you're barking up the wrong tree. Just use simple English. Last, avoid slang like, oh, you don't want to have FOMO when it comes to this investment. No, you don't want to mention FOMO because that's slang. Right? So watch out for these basics. We may say things like this when we're speaking casually, but you're now making a formal investment presentation. Here's some basics on formatting. The font size on your screen should be greater than 20 points. That's just a thing to watch for. Sometimes you put so much work in that slide and you have so many words that you have to go down to a 12-point font. Guess what? The audience cannot read clearly a 12-point font. Furthermore, that's way too much detail anyway. So use this as a guideline. Try to keep it at 24. That's a nice size, but don't go below 20 and really avoid going anywhere where there's going to be a squinting happening from your audience to look at your slides. Next is use common fonts. Arial, Tahoma are common. Third is don't bullet every item. For example, the very first line doesn't have to be bulleted because the first line has subpoints. So you don't need the bullet on the first point. And keep the list short. This is an example where we have one level of bullets. That's okay. And then we might have 2 levels of bullets. Well, that's getting a little detailed. Then you get 3, which is getting a little smaller. Go to 4, you better stop. So don't have that many bullets. You may have those many layers of your presentation when you're speaking, but you don't have to capture all those layers on the slide itself. The other, I guess, is along with the font point, is don't squeeze too much on the slide. Very dense slides are impossible to read, receive, and if you're reading that to them, this thing starts looking like a lecture, not a presentation. No commas. In other words, avoid long sentences that will appear to be run-ons. For example, we develop branding strategies, marketing programs, media plans, advertising copy, collateral materials, and performance metrics. Like, what do you do as a marketing services firm? Stick to the ones that really are important and keep it nice and simple. No marketing speak. For example, we're the premier service provider for template-based web presence solutions for customers who place priorities on price and ease of use. That actually came from Wix. So watch out for long-winded marketing speak full of jargon types of phrasing. Use videos. despite how good this guy may be, use videos only if it's absolutely necessary. Why? You're the presenter. You want the eyeballs on you, not the screen. Most videos can be conveyed maybe more briefly and more powerfully in person than watching a video. Now, sometimes you have a video of a place that we cannot imagine. Like you're really talking about the plight of the slums in certain third world countries. Well, sometimes a video conveys thoughts or emotions that we cannot convey in person. In those cases, yes, go ahead and use a video. But be careful when you use them to not overwhelm the rest of the presentation that you're about to give. Fonts. Don't do things just to be fancy. Like you have fancy serifs or very bold fonts. Again, you may distract the audience from what you're doing by the font, and that's not why you're there. So no on the fonts. Animation, I could be walking over here and you will still be looking at the animation. We can't help it. Human beings have this innate sense of fight or flight. When we see movement, our eyes are drawn to that movement. So don't have anything that moves. It might be cool to see a spinning logo or some movement of your product underway, but show it once and then freeze it as you're speaking. Otherwise, guess what? They're going to watch the walking man and not you. The other thing is backgrounds. We have all of these possibilities in PowerPoint and other presentation tools. You can have some fancy background like this blue background, but again, is the point of your slide the background? Keep it simple. Or fancy, here we have the beautiful San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge. Wow, it must be about the San Francisco Bay Area. Again, is that your point? So don't do that either. It might be fancy, might even be appealing, but it's not effective for what you're trying to do. Here's another set of problems. You can count the set of problems. We have logos like the Perfect Pitch or Halt. Actually, Halt's on here twice. And then on the bottom, you have the date, you have the name of the company, you have the presentation name, planning and pitching, and you have a slide number, and you have a copyright. Now, this is all distractions to the slide. You may want to have a copyright, and you only need to put it on the first slide. You don't need it on every single slide. Dates, we don't want that date there because, first of all, it might be stale dated. The other thing is it distracts to looking at the date. There is some controversy. If you look at A.C. Ross's book, he will say that some people, that would be me, like to see page numbers. Other people, like him, don't like page numbers. I like it for a very practical reason. If I'm watching a presentation, let's say it's 20 slides, and I don't want to interrupt during the flow of the presentation itself, but I have a question or a point to make, I may just on my notes quickly note 9 and note a brief note to myself on what my question is on 9. Otherwise, I'd have to write down the entire title of that slide in order to refer back to it during Q&A. So I think there's a practical reason to have a number. Let's not make it huge. Let's just put it discreetly in the corner. But I personally like slides. And AC and I can fight over it and have a beer over this argument. Other distractions include clip art. Clip art, again, is available. It's free. It may be cool, but it may distract. Copyrighted images. If you're doing certain presentations in certain settings, you can't even use those. They're a violation of copyright. We have some exclusions for educational purposes, but don't bank on that. Use them very, very judiciously. Third is gratuitous animations, similar to what I was saying as far as logos that spin, etc. But that might also include a lot of fancy builds inside of PowerPoint. Excessive amounts of things flying in and out might again distract. Word art has the same issue as clip art. And bullets and dashes everywhere, again, is a distraction and needless amount of detail. Watch out for slide transitions, the whirling slides where every time you change slides, the thing goes around and does crazy things. Once in a while, that's okay to change the pace a little bit or to demark certain breaks in your presentation, but don't do this every single slide, some fancy transition. There are some alternatives to PowerPoint, like Prezi. Thankfully, that is not as popular today as it has been in the past, where there's way too much movement beyond what we would normally need as the recipient of messaging delivered through a presentation. So watch out for fancy, overly dramatic transitions that come in slide presentations. For qualitative slides, some examples might be a business model. You must have a business model. We'll show you one in a moment. SWOT. You could have a SWOT, and there's a lot of good use and insights from SWOT, but there's some caution that we'll raise later on. Business model canvas, very much similar to SWOT. Important tool, vital tool, you might even say, but does it belong in a presentation? Maybe not in the base presentation. Too much detail. Or flowcharts. I like flowcharts. They're easy to see. It shows the progression and sequence and dependencies. So flowcharts generally are a good thing. And illustrations. Do we use illustrations? Yeah. If it's needed, illustrations could often be more successful than the spoken word. Here's an example of a business model as a must-have. This is one from one of the companies I work with, Alibris, and we raised about $500,000 in our angel round, just using this slide to explain the simple nature of our beginning of our business and the flow of our suppliers into our company and then out to our customers. This is now generalized to be called the exchange model in e-commerce. But you should show something that says who are the key players in the economics of your business. Who provides you material, raw material information? Who do you provide it to in turn? And where does the money come from and where does the money go? So that should be covered in a business model. SWOT. This is why I made my comment about SWOT. It could swamp your presentation. It would take you 15-20 minutes to do justice to all the bullets you have on this SWOT chart. So what's the suggestion? Use SWOT as a tool to create your insights. Once you have the insights, create a slide for that. It doesn't matter where the insight came from. The key is the insight. So you could put the SWOT in an appendix, but bring forward a very simple slide describing your key insight or insights from the SWOT analysis. Same thing with business model canvas. Each of these boxes has a wealth of information, but do you want to go through every single one of these 9 boxes? No. Put it in your appendix, so it's there if you really need it during Q&A. But in the presentation, take the key parts and describe them on 1 or more slides, but don't try to cram everything on 1 slide. Here's an example of a flowchart that shows the progression and timing of the different actions toward our objective. So flowcharts can work. Not too many, but once in a while, I think audiences enjoy seeing the sequence and logical progression of your business or your process. And sometimes illustrations can tell the story. Like here's some fancy diagnostic or control device. Looks like some mixer of some sort. And this might be a good way to describe what you're doing. Let's avoid the following common mistakes. Here's the first one. Look at this, and what do you see? Well, first of all, is the valuable real estate that I mentioned is now wasted. We have the generic market share title. So get rid of that. Make that better. The other is, what else you see about this slide that isn't right? Like, what is the point? There's so many colors, and the legend is so small on the bottom. The point for this particular slide is the valuable real estate is on top, particularly if there's any complexity in the content of the slide itself. So first point, don't do generic titles. The point here is better made by the following. Electric cars will overtake gas, because that's the point, right? The gas-powered cars are the ones that are in green and brown, and we see that by the end of the time period, most of the cars are going to be powered by some form of electricity. So that's the point. You use that, and then as you're explaining the chart, the audience will understand what you're saying. More common mistakes. Title. What's the insight from the slide? We covered that already. Use videos only when essential and quick. We covered that a bit already. Don't squeeze too much into one slide. Avoid SWOT and BMC in particular because there's just too much in there. It's not good or bad. It's just that let's pick the points that are necessary and present those. Avoid fancy fonts, animation, backgrounds, watermarks, excessive referencings, distractions. Let's minimize those. And also, graph that confuses rather than enlightens. We'll talk about graphs in our next topic. But for now, let's just note that graphs can be very powerful, but let's make sure that we have the best possible graphic to make our point. And for sure, watch out for typos and grammatical errors. Similar to a resume. If you have a typo on your resume, the recipient, the potential hiring manager, will look at it and say, is Larry so sloppy in his work because his resume has typos? They're going to assume that that's your level of quality and professionalism. And we know it's not. So make sure, first of all, your resume looks beautiful, but make sure that there are no typos or grammatical errors on the slides, because it may lead someone to a conclusion about you and your team that just isn't true. But why do that? Make sure you edit. Okay, so that's what not to do. What should we do? Consider augmenting tables that we use for comparisons. This is a perfectly good set of information about comparing different energy bars and across different attributes. But this is pretty hard to deliver and understand the point of the slide. If we do an after, we see that, oh, it has color. So color says if it's blue, it's a disadvantage. If it's yellow, it's kind of in the even. And if it's green, it's to our advantage. Very easily, we see that element bars has more advantages than any other energy bar. That's harder to get when you're looking at this. Even though it has advantage, disadvantage, etc., mere adding color adds to the strength of that presentation. So use colors to augment tables that have a lot of density to them. Next is you consider using what we call a stoplight chart, because our minds are used to a stoplight. Green means go, yellow means caution, red means stop. So here we look at this and green means good. Same thing. AutoCAD capabilities, third-party plugins, these are attributes, and then the competitors of analog, CAD metrics, etc. Clearly, analog design has more green. This is an example of an effective and commonly used way to describe your competitive advantages and disadvantages. Again, using colors in a chart to make it easily understood. The other point to make is fit and finish, kind of how the entire presentation looks, slide by slide or in totality. Here's a checklist. So first, on text and vocabulary, no typos, no misspellings. The slide and chart title delivers the message, not just an agenda item. No unexpected abbreviations or acronyms. No texting expressions, no BTWs or FWIW or LOL. This will not work. Or slang like majorly or gonna. Let's not put those in a presentation. We're not at a bar. We're in a formal presentation. And then correct word usage, margin versus markup, very commonly confused. Or affect versus effect. Or EG versus IE. Each of these are differences and are commonly used incorrectly in common language. For international situations, again, many things to be wary of. First is correct spelling. If we're presenting in London, they use a different version of English than Americans. In fact, they may be upset that Americans who stole their language is now using American English instead of British English. So be careful with the audience and make a conscious decision on which version of English you're going to use. Then watch out for terminology. Billion versus milliard, revenue versus turnover. These are the words used in different cultures and different countries. Use and display one currency if you can throughout the entire presentation. If you're switching back from dollars to euros to yen, that will cause confusion because the frame of reference will be moving around on your audience. Use commas and decimal points correctly for the country. In the US, we use 1, 000, comma 000. Other countries may go 10000, comma 00. Right? So be aware of that and make a conscious decision on what you're doing. And finally, colors match cultural or audience usage. Like losses are usually red. Profit is usually green. The next section is graphic and animation. Be careful that the audience may have some people that are colorblind. So if you use color and you rely a lot on color to make your point, be considerate of those who cannot see that distinction on the slide. The other is use color to clearly depict highlights, similarity, and differences. Could be quite powerful. Our brain processes many things. So let's take advantage of that. We're going to cover later the section on charts and graphs. So summary of do's and don'ts. Do's include every slide has a purpose and adds to the message. KISS, keep it simple as far as backgrounds, fonts, bullets, and phrases. The graphics and images are useful for business models, flowcharts, concepts, and illustration. Don't use generic title. I probably said that about 5 times. That's how much I dislike those. And then don't do Time Magazine. We will talk about that in our next section to exaggerate the truth. This is on graphics. Don't put multiple graphs on a page unless they illustrate one point. And avoid videos unless they're essential. Fonts should be simple and readable. Generally watch out for serifs in the fonts like Times New Roman, as common and well understood that font is. It's nicer to have a cleaner, non-serif font. And then keep the audience's attention on you. And you're the presenter and the message, which is what you're describing in your words as reinforced by what's on the slide. So we finished topic number 3 on creating slides, which are first of 2 on slides. We covered general comments like keep it simple, titles tell the message, understandable terms. We looked at some details of qualitative slides like graphics and colors are effective or watching out for gimmicks and videos and animated GIFs. And we covered some do's and don'ts.